I'd like to introduce to everyone James Porter. He's someone I got to know as we investigated a training platform for cyber awareness for our division. And he always had such a sense of humor about what we were talking about that I really appreciated, because sometimes dealing with cybercrime and the cyber criminals can get you feeling pretty down. And I thought he would just be a great person to give us some insight into how to protect ourselves. He's given me lots of good advice about that. And the hope is that you will find this time well spent. It will protect you and your family, especially going into the holiday season when you're all shopping online. So with that introduction, James, are you prepared to take it away?
Sure, I can make up something, absolutely.
All right. I'll tell you if there's any good questions in the chat.
Please do, yeah, because what I have found through my many years of presenting on a bunch of different topics is I actually never really know what I'm going to talk about next. So I look for feedback from the audience, and that's much more difficult to do in a virtual setting. So thank you. There's some very pertinent information about me, mostly my name, phone number, and email. I'll make an ask at the end. If you have questions, by all means, call or write. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm a technologist at heart, and so even though I have a bad title now, which says sales guy on it, I try not to be too salesy. I spent most of my career talking about technology and kind of living in a world of technology, and I'm proud to say, my phone was just ringing in the house. I'm still that guy whose kids phone me for tech advice, which I think at this stage is still a badge of honor, because many of us have got to the stage now where we go to our children for tech advice. So in my case, they're still coming to me. So I think that's a positive. I'm not sure exactly. So if I click here to advance page, maybe. Now there's a question. How do I make the page go to the next one? There we go. Okay, so here's who I am. I'm a tech guy at heart. I've been in the Edmonton marketplace selling technology and working in the technology space since I started doing it in 1989. For those of you that are good at math, that means I'm old. And I started selling retail actually in my early days. For anyone that was around in that time frame, there was a little computer store on 124th Street called Software House. And it was they were one of the early PC software resellers in town. I started working there part-time while I was in university because I was bored. My day job at the time, or my real job, was I was actually training to be an accountant, and I decided for some reason I should dabble or find something to do in the tech space because I was kind of bored. And one thing led to another, and never really have left the industry. So I started doing that in '89, and I've been working on sort of the hardware manufacturer, software manufacturer since about 2000. I always lived in Edmonton or in this surrounding area of Edmonton, and I've traveled fairly extensively across Western Canada, talking and kind of working and selling in this space. So that's who I am. There's my bona fides. So I might know a little bit about this, but many of you probably know more than I do, frankly. So let me talk about some best practices, and I throw this slide together not because I want you to write these all down or anything, but really this helps me to sort of categorize my thoughts. And I don't have a bunch of slides, but let's kind of walk through these in a bit of an order, but not really. And you'll notice I wander a bit as I talk and chat. So when people ask me in my personal life and my professional life, but often in my personal life, how do I protect myself from an online perspective? I will tell you, the number one thing that you need to worry about, and I so highly encourage you to do, is the first item on this slide. And that is the fact that you need to establish and keep unique passwords for every login that you create. And if you think about your life now, it is filled with logins. There are many, 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 many of them. And too often what we do is take an easy route, and we tend to duplicate the use of our passwords across these multiple sites. Then we make it even worse because they're difficult. We think we have a really good, unique one. We write it down and we put it beside our piece of paper, beside us on a piece of paper, or a sticky note on our monitor. Some of us think we're really sneaky and we put it into a spreadsheet or a sheet or something like that. We password protect it. Maybe not the best password, but we protect it in some fashion. We put it in there. And because we might use multiple devices, we maybe store it in a cloud instance of some sort. We think we're being pretty safe by doing that. The challenge is that, when we use that common password across those many sites, what happens is we are no longer in control of where that password actually exists. So every time we open up the newspaper lately, you will hear about some sort of consumer environment that has been compromised in some fashion. And usually when that's compromised, there's two things that they try to get out of that, the bad guys. They're not necessarily targeting you specifically, they're targeting volumes of people specifically, and they are looking for usernames and they're looking for passwords. And the reason they're looking for that, those credentials, is that people do is exactly as I described. They tend to use that same password across a whole bunch of different locations. And as a result, that password, while you might use it on something somewhat innocuous, think of, logging into something silly like, a forum site where you might be communicating with other people, and really it's just your identity that they have the ability to be able to potentially take advantage of there. More importantly, you may use that same password and username combination to log into your bank, or log into your personal health site, or log into your payroll application, or this place where you might go and see what your payroll slips are if the work is providing that. There's lots of different places where you might do that login, where by the bad guys having that data, now they have the ability to be able to do something a little more nefarious with those things. Anyone that paid attention this year, Canadian Revenue Agency ended up, they had to shut down their website for a period of time because they recognized they had a bunch of bad logins going on. So it wasn't that they necessarily lost their data, but that people were attacking that site, leveraging data that they might have found from other environments, hotel sites, travel sites. There's a lot of these places where they gather that data and then they try to log in as you into your bank and so on. So if you hear nothing else in this conversation, use a unique password per site you do. Now everybody says, well, wait a minute, that's painful, especially if you go to the second line where it says, those need to be 20 characters in length or more, right? Well, how in the world am I going to do that? How would I make it unique and so on? And that's what really drives to the next point, which is invest in a good password manager. And so there's a couple of them I throw up there. One of them is called 1Password. The other one's called LastPass. I'll put an ad out for 1Password. That's the one I use. They're Canadian. The company is actually called Agile Bits that makes it. They're out of Hamilton, Ontario. And I've been using them for a period of time. In fact, I encourage my family to use them. And I encouraged them enough that I actually went out and licensed it as a family license for it, so that everyone in the family has the ability to be able to do that. What a password manager will do for you is two things. First of all, it's a very convenient place for you to store those unique passwords that you create for each one of your sites and for those sites you log into, as well as the login name you use for it, because some places you don't have to use your email address as your login address, login username. You can create your own, and so that's a way to be able to keep track of that. Secondarily, a good password manager will also give you the ability to be able to generate those random passwords. And whether it's a series of digits and numbers, or it's something like a phrase that you might choose to do inside of there, a password manager will do that for you. What's also unique about it is that, and the reason I chose 1Password in my case is that it gives you the ability to be able to have this concept of individual vaults where I might keep passwords that I'm concerned about for myself, but also a shared vault where I can store and share things where I want the family to have access to that. So think Netflix login as an example, right? So you want to have that username and password be shared for people that are logging in with your Netflix account inside of your household. And so that's a convenient way for you to be able to store that still in a secure location, but available to multiple members of the family. The other thing that 1Password and LastPass do is that they have clients which will run across your multiple devices that might operate in your environment. So in my case, that's a tablet, that's an iPhone, and it is multiple devices, both work device as well as personal devices from a personal computer perspective, whether that's a Mac or a PC and so on. And so 1Password stores my passwords in a cloud instance and runs inside of a browser instance as well, so that when working in a browser, I have access to a sort of one-click, I can see all my passwords inside of there, and can actually do a fancy copy and paste into a login screen that I might be seeing on my browser, and the same on my phone. If I'm logging into a site using on my phone, I have access to that same data sitting there, and it syncs those two things together. So LastPass will do something similar in that regard. My point to that is that invest in a good password manager. You can also start storing things in there, things like credit card numbers and so on in there as well, so that if you need to have those from for example, you're on an online, some sort of e-commerce site where you need to be able to put a credit card number into there, you can do that as well, right?
Okay, James, before you go on, I have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
One is from Brittany. She's asking, is LastPass only a phone app, or is it available on a website? Like if I wanted to open it on my computer. I think you answered that, but what is the answer?
Yeah, the answer is yes. So certainly it is available as, I'm more familiar with 1Password, but LastPass is my understanding does the same thing as well. It's available as an application on your computer. It'll run inside of your browser as well as on your mobile device.
Okay, thank you. What's the number one thing criminals are trying to steal when they do their scams and their hacks?
Two things they want. They're looking for credentials. So as I described it before, your username and password combination. And they're probably looking for credit card numbers, right? So credit card where I have the ability to be able to then use that for subsequent purchases. How they get both of those is usually the same scenario, right? Where you are interacting with a website which you think is something of real, and turns out it is not, and you are submitting your credentials to them, thinking you're logging into, a particular website, or you're thinking it's a valid e-commerce site and so on, and doing it that way. And that brings up point probably.
Wait, there's more questions.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh.
Veronica wants to know, do you know how much it costs for 1Password?
To be frank, I don't know. It's probably, I'll pick a number. I think the family service for us annually, $50 to $80, something like that. It's not, it's not the end of the world, but it's not insignificant as well. So there's somebody just throw it in the chat, $500 per month USD, or $5 per month USD.
Yeah, $5 per month. Thank you. Yeah, you get what you pay for. I'll throw that in too. Jake Brandon says phone and web, but one or the other unless you pay for it with LastPass. And he's including a link that I hope, Jake, is secure, that people can click on to find out more information.
Right. In fact, that brings up a good point. That's my next point. I just want to cover that. Is that, we often see emails, and so the concerns people talk about is, embedded links inside of email. Do I know to click on it or not? So one of the sort of rules you can carry to heart is that if you're not really sure about a link in an email, instead of clicking on it in the email, open up a browser and type it into the browser, right? Because what happens is that it's very possible in an email that what is displayed is different than what is actually embedded in the link itself. So the link could be, going to something completely different than what is actually displayed on your screen of what you think the link is. So if you're not sure about it, go into a browser and type in the exact words of the link. That takes you there. And that probably points also, if one of the questions, the pre-questions you had forwarded to me, Leah, was, how do I know it's an email from my bank? How do I know it's from whatever? Well, if you're not sure, then go and interact directly with the bank yourself, rather than clicking on a link or replying to an email and so on. The best example of that is, we all been getting these phone calls from the CRA, so to speak, telling us that we have problems. Well, I know we all think we're very important, but I can tell you the CRA is not going to call you. If they really want to talk to you, they're sending you a registered letter, right? Because they want record, they want track of the fact that they have approached you. They're not going to phone you and say you have a problem.
Okay, I have another question going back to password, which is about using Chrome or Edge password storage. Like when Chrome says, do you want me to remember this password? What's your opinion about that?
It's valid. This is a political comment. How much more do you want Google to know about you, right? and they know lots about you, and potentially by storing inside of the browser, they incrementally know more about you. It also makes it much more difficult if you decide you don't want to work with Chrome anymore and you're going to use Firefox or some other platform from a browser perspective, or you decide you're moving from a Mac to a PC, or you're moving from something to somewhere else. You may want to create a layer of abstraction from the browser and from the operating system, and that's what these password managers do, because you're now extracting yourself from the browsers and that manufactured independently.
Sure. And I'd like to add that when we had that near miss with ransomware last year, one of the credential hunters the criminals used did look for those credentials in the browser. And that's a reason I would choose not to do that. Also, if you're at work and you're storing personal passwords in the browser, that can be problematic for you too. So that's my 2 cents there.
And yeah, most organizations I've worked for, they allow me to install my, in my case, 1Password in my browser on my work machine. So then I have my personal, passwords with me. I also keep my work ones inside of there as well. And that allows me to be able to have that same availability across multiple devices. I find that really helpful personally.
Okay. There's one final question about passwords, and it's from Erica. She's concerned that she has to retrieve her password, but she's not near a computer. So she's a little uncomfortable with storing things on her phone and not sure about this LastPass.
So storing on your phone versus storing on your computer, in both cases are going to be inside of an application where the application is going to be interacting with a secure cloud-based storage. In fact, is what they're doing. You can set up all of the security measures, including, if you want, two-factor authentication. We'll talk about that next year. So there are mechanisms so that you have to have separate pins to get into not only your phone itself, but then into the application, in this case, 1Password. So you would have to authenticate to 1Password as well, whether it's using something like Face ID or a PIN or two-factor authentication as well. So I believe and have committed from my side that, I see them as secure, and there are enough security measures in place in order to be able to control that.
Okay, thank you. One last question for you. What does it mean when a criminal does a password spray attack? Like, what's that all about?
So a password spray is that, so as we talked about, the challenge or the scenario where you log into a site, there's 2 things you need. You need the credential, meaning the username. Secondarily, you need a password. A password spray is that where I'm going to take that username, likely your email address, that's the most common thing used today, and I'm going to try to repeatedly log into that site using the most commonly used passwords or combination of words that people do. So think as default or admin, or your name spelled backwards with 1, 2, 3 after it, or those are the simple ones. But that's kind of the concept of this password spray is, and I'm going to and they develop dictionaries over time of these commonly used passwords, and I'm just going to repeatedly try to brute force attack login using your username, which I know is right, and these most commonly used passwords. And it's just luck of the draw that they get in.
Okay, so why use two-factor authentication then?
So two-factor authentication is now you're adding a third layer of uniqueness to you. So your username, not so unique anymore. Password's supposed to be unique, but we've just talked about how it often is not. And the third layer is two-factor authentication, where you now have some sort of second way where you are now authenticating to that. So one common one, as example, would be a challenge passphrase. So if you remember the days where you used to phone the bank or you were talking to the credit card company and they would say, what is your mother's maiden name? They use that as a mechanism to be able to do it. That's an example of a second factor authentication. You've given your username and potentially some sort of password, and now they're asking you a challenge question like, what's your mother's maiden name? In the computer space now, two-factor authentication is usually associated with some sort of mechanism where they know your cell phone number and they send you an SMS text with a number. Then you have to take that number and use that to continue to log into the website. A more sophisticated way to do that now is something like Google Authenticator or one of these sort of devices or services like that. Microsoft has one as well, where you create a connection between the login environment you're logging into and some sort of challenge environment like Google Authenticator, where you pull up your phone, a smartphone, could be on your PC, and there's a running series of numbers that the application knows as well, so that you provide the number to the application and continue to make your login. Sometimes you have to look for that, meaning that you when you're creating an account in these environments, see if they offer two-factor authentication, and if they do, turn it on, right? So, and then you'll have to go through the steps associated with creating that connection and how they want to do that. But if it is offered to you, take advantage of it. It's going to add a layer of complexity. It's going to add some time when you go to log in, but sometimes loss of convenience means better security, right? And that's sort of the trade-off we constantly have to battle.
So is that kind of going to become the standard everywhere, that we have two-factor authentication? What are you seeing in the industry?
Yeah, I think you'll see more and more of it. Here's an example of an area where you don't see it, and it's bothersome for me and many of my peers in the industry. Your banks typically don't do two-factor authentication, right? So you could argue that sort of the crown jewels, certainly of your personal life from a financial perspective, most banks today don't do two-factor authentication. But I think you'll slowly start seeing that being rolled out inside of their environments as you do that, because passwords simply are not enough yet. So.
Thank you, James. You're free to go on.
Okay. My next item here is, and I wrote down burner cards. So don't think this is, you're all about to become Jason Bourne in your secret agent lives. But one of the things you might want to consider doing is that if you're doing a lot of online purchasing and you're worried about, especially if you're purchasing from sites beyond sort of the standard fare. So Amazon and most of those large environments, they're going to have strong enough security practices that you're probably not at risk in terms of problems around those sites. But if you're buying from, other sites which are potentially a little less mainstream, you might want to consider having a separate credit card with a smaller limit on it, where you simply do online purchases with, so that it limits your exposure if that card was somehow compromised. The second thing that it does then is if you only are doing online purchases with it, you don't have any sort of reoccurring transactions going against that card monthly. So if that card is compromised and you have to get it canceled and replaced, you're not having to phone up and deal with a bunch of different organizations where they have your card on file and want to make sure that you get your phone bill paid for every month, or your gas, your heating bill, and so on, because now you forgot to phone them to tell them your card, but you needed a new card, and so on. So most banks are offering that today. I use one in my home. It's got I think it's a $500 or $1,000 limit. It also slows me down from spending too much money online as well. But the idea behind it is if it goes, then it's not the end of the world if that card gets compromised and I have to replace it.
This is advice that James gave me after my card got compromised, and I had to change every single one of those accounts over. Took 2 months. Unbelievably frustrating. This is really good advice. Have a special credit card for online purchases.
Yeah.
James, before you go on, there's a question someone threw in, Lisa, about the problem she sees with two factors. If you misplace or lose your phone, then how can you use it? Is there a way around this?
Yeah, backup. So backup that two-factor authentication. So it's using an app like Google Authenticator and so on. You have the ability to be able to back up those credentials inside of there. So have a backup of it, so that if you do lose your phone, when you replace your phone, it's now back in place again. And most of those environments will have a third mechanism. So let's say your two-factor is not available, that Google Authenticator and so on is not available to you, they might have another way to be able to authenticate you, think challenge password, something like that. So most of those organizations will have something like that, so you can still continue on. It's just gonna add a little bit of extra pain in order to be able to do it, but security often equals pain. So.
Okay, thank you. We're trying to not associate security with pain. So stop that.
Okay, security equals complexity sometimes, and security equals a little bit of extra time, but that's the trade-off you have to make, right? So, yeah.
Okay, we got a couple more questions for you, or actually a comment from Terry. It says that Google has a number of ways you can back up. I know I have printed backup codes from Google and had them in my wallet, and that has been very helpful. Sometimes the second factor is, in fact, your location, the computer where you normally ping. It knows if you're on that computer, that's your second factor. That's really convenient. That one's not too hard.
Yeah.
Helen put in a question about voice recognition as a layer of security. I've had that happen too, where they said, we want to hear you talk for a while. I think it was tell us, because we're going to have a voice recording. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think classically that's been pretty good, though. If anyone's paid attention to some of the deep fake stuff going on, there is certainly some layer of concern around that. Deep fake is this concept where they can apply an awful lot of computing power against it, and they can fake voice, mannerism, facial structures, and so on. You're starting to see it now, where you're seeing it in the political realm and a little bit in the celebrity realm, where they're finding ways to be able to produce videos where it really looks like that, celebrity, political person, and so on, and looking like them. So there's always worries that something like audio and visual, frankly, is something that might be duplicable in software, right? So, but classically, voice has been fine. So. And the second part of that is you look at it and say, well, how much risk am I really at? Are they really going to spend the time and money in order to be able to duplicate my voice? Probably not. But if I'm somebody famous, then they get return out of spending the compute time and money to do it. For us individually, we're probably all pretty safe.
Okay. So Lisa had a further question, but I think what she means here, but in the meantime, so if she has two-factor on her phone, how does she set up the backup at this point? I think that's what she's asking.
Yeah, so depending on your phone environment, so the simplest way, probably if you're an iPhone, make sure you've turned on what do they call backup? I apologize, I don't use it. Their Drive, Apple Drive. Sorry, I can't remember the name of it. By default, when you have in your Apple environment, they can back up your browser history. All of the applications on there can do it. And so iCloud, yes, there. Thank you for all of you that put it in the thing. So iCloud will back up your applications on there, including things like Authenticator and so on. I'm not hearing you now, Leah. You're on mute, I think.
Sorry about that. I'm so looking forward to never hearing that you're on mute again. Lisa says, no, if you're missing your phone for a while. So I'll try and answer this one. If you think you're going to be without your phone, then have those printout codes with you. The other thing to know about the Google two-factor is it's not every time you log on. It's if you log on for an unusual location, and I think it's every 28 days or something like that. So you'd probably be able to log on just fine without your phone most of the time. And then when you hit the time where you need that second factor, having that printout has worked well for me. Okay,
Yeah,
I hope we've answered that question. Why don't you go ahead, though? We've got about 15 minutes left, James.
Sure. Other things you might want to consider is that be careful when you are in a public setting in terms of logging into public Wi-Fi. And so there's two reasons that they want that stores now offer public Wi-Fi. You find them in airports, obviously, every Starbucks, every whatever. They're doing it for two reasons. One, they want to provide convenience to you because, certainly the coffee shops don't mind it if you sit there a little bit because likely you're going to buy yet another coffee. The second thing is that they're tracking credentials on you in the sense they know who you are, why you're there, and so on. In retail settings, they actually want to be able to monitor your traffic as you move through the locations. They want to understand kind of traffic patterns and so on. But in some of these more sketchy areas, and you've seen this a lot in airports as an example, where people will put up rogue Wi-Fi environments. So you can't really tell whether you're logging into a real Wi-Fi or something that somebody's running there. What they're using that for is they're actually They're harvesting data from you. So think of it as a scenario. I'm in an airport. I log onto a Wi-Fi, and I just have to go do one thing on my banking application. I need to transfer money. I'm going on vacation. I need to make sure I got enough money in an account to be able to pay a bill, whatever it is. So I quickly log into my bank app, whether it's on my phone or whether it's on a computer or whatever, and I log in. I give it all the credentials and so on. I log in to do my thing. Well, it's potential on that network you're on that they're actually capturing that data as it goes through. So the way to get around that is that and consider investing in something like one of these private virtual private network environment. What VPN stands for is exactly that, virtual private network. And the idea is then now you are tunneling inside of that network connection, that Wi-Fi connection you're on. Now that traffic is encrypted, so the bad guys can't necessarily see the data inside of your traffic, where you go, what you do, and so on. So you're somewhat protected there. And so VPN services are available. I use one called NordVPN. There's a number of them out there. But when you're in a public environment of some sort, log in, connect to the Wi-Fi, then turn on your VPN. So now that data is encrypted, and now nobody can see necessarily what you're doing. The other thing, as I rolled on my list, the next thing is stay current on your operating system and stay current on sort of the devices that make up your network. So in your home, that's whether it's a wireless router or something like that, make sure you keep your firmware on those things up to date. The firmware gets updated for a couple different reasons. So the operating system gets updated for a couple different reasons. One, when stuff breaks, they actually don't want it to break. Secondarily, they want to make sure that security, you want to make sure that the firmware is up to date, because they're going to be downloading security updates to the software to be able to ensure that sort of known bad or known broken things are patched inside of those environments today. There is an entire business, certainly in the corporate side of things, where organizations where they produce software, and all that software does is scan your network, looking for devices that have unpatched or known broken things. And it could be all sorts of things inside of your environment. It could be your printer in your network. There's all sorts of mechanisms to be able to do it. In fact, if you go look online, I think it was Marketplace a number of years ago, where they actually had a company go and hack the home of a consumer in Toronto. They got in through their wireless router, and they were able to turn their lights on and off in the house and that kind of stuff, just to show how relatively easy it was to do. One of the easiest ways to solve that problem is stay current in terms of the firmware and the operating system of all the devices that make up the environment today. To go with that, sorry, go ahead, Leah.
Yeah, there's a question from Cynthia. She's asking, is home Wi-Fi secure? And you know what, James, I think if you move your mouthpiece down a little bit, that might help.
Okay.
Oh, much better.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So is home Wi-Fi secure? Absolutely, with some caveats, right? You want to make sure that you have some sort of password on your Wi-Fi, so that when people connect to your environment, you know who's connecting, so you can control who's accessing and on your network. Don't make it default. Make sure you have the passwords changed on your devices inside of your environment. So don't make your login to your Wi-Fi router inside your environment, admin or hello and admin or whatever the default is that the manufacturer put in place. You would be surprised how commonly that happens, right? So keep it up to date. Make sure you have some sort of challenge Wi-Fi password in place so that you can control who's connected to it. Change it once in a while. I know that's painful, and people are going to have to give it a new password and connect on another device, but do those kind of things just to sort of call it spring cleaning. Was it October? We're supposed to go put in new batteries in our smoke detectors. We'll change your Wi-Fi password at the same time. The other thing is, one of the questions that got asked is around virus scanning. So, yes, invest in one. You don't need to spend a fortune on it. Virus scanning, they are going to go out. They use a signature. Basically, what it is those pieces of software have a whole series of signatures in them. They understand known bad viruses that get in your machine. So what happens is it'll actually scan your drive. It'll scan inbound applications as they come into your environment, and they compare it to a known bad list of malicious software, and they will flag it if it's bad. Where most of the industry has gone now is the concept of the zero-day attack. Zero-day means is that there is no known sample of that bad malware, and so virus scanning is going to catch what happened in the past. It's going to catch sort of up to yesterday or up to the last time that you updated that software or downloaded the latest signatures for it. It's not necessarily going to catch the brand new stuff that's going to land right in your desk that got written yesterday. That's usually more of an issue on a corporate side. So from a personal perspective, having virus scanning in place, having every once in a while scanning your environment, that's a worthwhile use of your time, right? You don't have to spend a fortune on it. There's relatively inexpensive ones out there. Again, this is an example where I license this for my family, and so it's a mandatory in my house for my kids to that they have that running on any of their devices, and I share it across the multiple devices in the environment. Backup is the same scenario, though I think to some degree the whole concept of backup's kind of going away. The one area that you might still want to make sure you have backup, when we talked about it, was sort of your mobile device. Make sure your mobile device is backed up because of things like your Authenticator apps and so on. You want that data to be available if you replace that device and so on. But as we drive and go to more and more cloud-based services, the concept of local storage and keep a data that only exists in one place on your local laptop or your local PC in your house isn't so much there anymore, as we've mostly moved to cloud-based services of some sort. But if you still have data, pictures is an example of that, where it only sits in one place, take a backup, find a mechanism to be able to do a backup of it, whether it's simply copying it to an external drive and putting that in your safe or taking it off-site or something. But some of that, if a picture only exists in one place, and that place is electronic, Murphy lives, and it's Murphy's Law thing, somehow that's going to disappear. So, back it up.
Yeah, thank you for that, James. I would add that I believe the division has virus scanning that staff can put at home. I'll look into that and I'll send out that information to everyone. So I don't think you have to purchase this. I think this is something we provide. I will also say my mother is an artist, and she has a laptop with pictures of every piece of artwork she has made, and she got hit by ransomware, if you can believe it. And so all that was gone because it wasn't backed up anywhere. So I really agree with you. Either back it up to the cloud or have a second hard drive you put stuff on. Yeah,
it's true. The next point there is I'll call it Internet of Things. So depending on how sophisticated your environment is, one of sort of the next layer of best practices you might want to consider is if you start adding more and more devices in your home, for think smart thermostat, think lights like Philips Hue, where you can change lights with your Wi-Fi attached lights and so on. You might want to consider actually creating a separate network for those devices. So have one as your sort of personal network where your laptop and so on connect to, and have another one where these sort of Internet of Thing type devices connect to phone. In my environment, I have smart TVs and those kind of things. I don't connect them to my personal network. I have a separate Wi-Fi network running for those devices to be able to connect to. So that scenario where I don't necessarily know who or what that device is talking to externally, I can separate those two pieces of traffic together. And I think you'll see more and more of that over time, where our Wi-Fi routers will start getting smarter, and the concept of creating and separating those two things becomes easier to do. So, other note there is I wrote down USB power. Anyone rode in an well, I should ask this another way around. Does anyone remember riding on an airplane? So back when we used to ride on airplanes, especially Air Canada, I used to do a lot of this. And so anyone ever notice when there was your television screen, there was a USB port there, you would plug in your phone because you needed to charge your phone, you'd plug it into there, and it would pop up on your phone saying, do you want to have this device that be able to access your photos and so on your phone. The reason it did that is your phone recognizes, in fact, that USB power wasn't just power, that USB port, it's also a mechanism of communication. You plug something into your computer on the USB port. It's not just for providing power, it's as a mechanism to be able to move data back and forth and so on. So you have to be somewhat concerned about these places where you plug in your phone to where you think is just power. In fact, they might be doing something beyond that. So be conscious of that. In fact, you can go out, and I used to give these away to people. I have it's a little dongle that sits between the USB power and my phone, and it basically removes the pins out of it so that only power would be able to move between it, no data would be able to move between it. But just be conscious when you go to plug into what you think is that free power location provided USB. Aren't they nice? That there could be something nefarious going on there. And the last note I have here is around location services. So this is something I think we all need to be a little more conscious of on our mobile devices, is what we provide location services to and what applications on our phone. And if you're an Apple user, which I am, you'll notice over time that you've got a lot more control now in terms of what applications have the ability to be able to see where I have been. And that's what location services is really doing, is tracking where you are on a per minute, per hour basis, and so that they can get an understanding of your patterns. Really take a look at the applications you're running on your phone and make the decision whether or not do they really need location services turned on. Do they need to only when I'm using the application? Do they want to have it on all the time, or do I want to simply not make it available to it all? And be brutally honest about that with yourself. And again, it's sort of that convenience conversation to say, is it worth having it on at all? Is it only when I'm inside of the application, or do I want to make it available all the time? I'll give you an example in my life. One of the joys, my children are getting a little older now, but one of the sort of the rules of the road in my world is that if we were providing a phone for you and we had location services turned on, at least for our application, we used to keep track of where each other were. And so that's an example of an application where I leave location services turned on. But many of the other ones, we turn them off entirely because they just don't need to know. Okay. Any other questions around that?
No, but your timing is perfect. Cynthia Prell threw in a question about cloud services contributing to our level of risk. I think we're going to have to call you back for that conversation, because that's a big, hairy beast. But do you have any final thoughts to share with us, James?
That's exactly I do, yeah. So the one thing I would remember is that, sort of this gut reaction is something too good to be true. It probably is, right? So it's that email coming in saying or that phone call saying you want a boat, or whatever. When you think something is too good to be true, it probably is. So have a good jaundiced eye at whatever you might be working with, connecting to, and so on, and really think about it and say, is it really my lucky day, or do I need to maybe take a second look at it? And then I've mentioned this a few times through our conversation, the sort of this concept of convenience versus secure, right? And it is somewhat of a trade-off to some degree between it. But I would encourage you to lean to the secure side. So two-factor authentication is an example of that. It takes an extra little bit of time in order to be able to provide that second level of authentication, but it's worth it in the long term. And I think you will see that over time, that will get faster. You'll get more used to doing it. And secondarily, more and more organizations are going to sort of demand that. And you're going to demand it of the places you work with as well, because you'll want to have a secure experience with it.
Okay.
Finally, any follow-on questions? There's my email. There's my phone number. By all means, reach out. I'm happy to ask questions. I'm passionate about this topic, and so happy to help in whatever way I can.
Okay. And if you have any swag to send my way, James, I will absolutely do a lottery amongst everyone who attended today.
I will definitely send some stuff your direction. Absolutely.
Awesome. It's great to kind of give you the strong arm in front of a whole bunch of people. You can't really say no.
Yeah,
right.
There is no no.
There is no no. Thank you guys so much for coming. I hope you got answers to your questions, but if not, please do reach out to James or to me. We're happy to answer anything we can.